Well, we can go ahead and get started, I think. It's 7:01. I want to welcome everybody tonight. My name is Bob Brown. I'm the Managing Director for the Center for Science of Information. The center is a National Science Foundation Science and Technology Center. We've been in existence for 5 years. It's a 10-year, $50 million project. And we have all of our partners listed there. This is correct, except for the University of Hawaii Manoa is now a partner institution. We just got renewed, and they are now a fully funded partner. I'll read you the mission statement for us. You can take this for what it's worth. Our mission is to advance science and technology through a new quantitative understanding of the representation, communication, and processing of information in biological, physical, social, and engineered systems. And so you can see how broad a statement that is, and take a look at all these partners and affiliates. And after 5 years, I dare say that we have now reached that permits many institutions. We've co-hosted this summer school in 2013 at Purdue. I think we had about 150, 160 in attendance there. Some of you I know were there. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Diego. Diego has actually been active in our center with Todd, who is a faculty partner. And Diego's come on recently. Our center is very interested in the outreach and education that we can do through this tool that will be discussed tonight, and we've got big plans for it. So thank you, Diego, and thank you, Todd. All right.
Thanks, Bob.
And thank you, Joanne. You're going to introduce Joanne.
Well, you'll be introducing her. Sure.
We have a Joanne, one of my lab mates, that's also going to help us. If you have any questions, just raise your hand.
Hi, everyone.
Oh, she's going to help you.
Okay, so my name is Diego Mesa. I'm a grad student in Todd Coleman's lab. So today is going to be a presentation about essentially scientific computing in the Python environment and all the tools that are involved in that. So this is a very informal in the sense that this is meant for you guys to follow along if you want to follow along. I also have a USB drive here for you guys to install missing packages or the Anaconda tool set. So feel free to ask me any questions. I'm just going to be briefly introducing and giving kind of an overview of a survey of the scientific computing environment. So just to note to everybody that this is an information theory summer school. And so we're going to be discussing something not so much to help you do information theory better, but to help you explain what you're doing to people not traditionally information theory. So that's kind of the take-home message. This is an excellent tool set to help not only conduct your research as a direct drop-in replacement for Matlab, but I find it's very helpful, and a lot of work is being put into this area, and a lot of people are starting to use this as a great way to interactively explain things to other people. So, information theorists work every day in the language of probability and statistics and things like that, and those are concepts like when you're working with clinical collaborators and just people from many different fields. This is a great way to explain what you're doing to them in a way that's easy for them to understand. And so we can just get right into it. Okay, so somebody had an excellent question just a few minutes ago about whether it's easy to port your Matlab code into Python. I'm sure most of us are already familiar with Matlab, as our day-to-day bread and butter way to conduct simulations, things like that. Python, maybe. Okay. Just a quick note for those of us walking in. If you want to follow along, you're going to need to install the Anaconda toolset. You can do that from the Continuum website. I can show that URL again. And also there's a USB drive right up here if anybody needs it. If you need it, raise your hand. Can you give that to me? I'll show that URL one more time. Oh, okay. Okay, well, just because I'm up here, this is still very informal, so feel free to ask me questions. So this is the URL where to install the entire Anaconda toolset, which is just a name for all of the packages we're going to use to try to set up our scientific Python environment. So navigate to this website, go ahead and download your installer, and that will automatically install upwards of 100 to 200 packages required to do scientific computing in Python on your own machine. Say that again? What? WinPython? Yeah, that's one. So is Python XY. So if you already have a set of packages installed from another toolset, that's fine too. This is just one example of that. In addition, all of the material that I'm going to be presenting today is available for you guys to download and follow through with us right now in the class. In addition to reviewing at your own time when you get home and things like that, I highly recommend that everyone navigate to this URL. That'll get you to the GitHub page where I've hosted all the material freely for anybody to use or contribute to. And you can just click right here, the download button, to download everything. Okay? Show that one more time. Okay? So sorry, all this material should have been sent out through an email, but we had some trouble with organizing, so we couldn't get an email out to you guys ahead of time. Okay. All right. So, just a quick outline. We're going to go through, installation, introduction, overview of what everything in the scientific Python ecosystem is. If there are any questions or anything, you guys stop me. If any technical difficulties, we have someone walking around to help you guys with that. We're going to introduce some of the main scientific libraries in the Python ecosystem. And this is going to be a quick kind of, we don't have much time tonight, so it's going to be a quick kind of dirty introduction. We're going to just see by example. The great thing about this kind of tool that I'm going to be using here tonight is that you guys can edit it and amend to it, as your understanding later on grows. So you can always keep editing this stuff and asking yourself questions and editing this document. As a way of introducing you guys to the explanatory power of this tool set, I'm going to be just kind of briefly talking about some of the machine learning libraries that are including in the SciPy ecosystem. And then I'll end with some really cool plot examples that show you guys some of the power of this tool set. Okay, so the number one point of confusion is between Python and Matlab. I'm sure the number one question you guys have here tonight is, what is Python? What is scientific Python? What does it have to do with Matlab? How exactly does this apply to me? So the point of confusion comes in because everything in the Matlab ecosystem is called Matlab. A company came, together and formed the Matlab company, and you have one unified system called Matlab, and everything is kind of just functions or little libraries of Matlab. Everything in Python, in the scientific Python ecosystem, has its own name. Because just to add, confusion to the matter, everything kind of has its own name. So we're going to hear a lot of vocabulary words like SymPy, SciPy, NumPy, scikit-learn. How do all those things relate to Python? One great visual way to realize that is something, it's just this kind of hierarchical image example. Python is a full programming language. Okay, that means that Python was used to make video games, web apps, everything before, anybody decided to build a scientific computing ecosystem around that. On top of this programming language, people built these scientific computing libraries, which are, these libraries that essentially interface with very low-level kind of high-speed numerical linear algebra libraries that are written in C and things like that. So people built this scientific ecosystem around this free and open source language. And that means that everything else above it is essentially free and open source. Okay? So that's one of the main motivating examples for using something like the scientific Python ecosystem. Everything built around Python for scientific computing is free and open source. That means researchers all over the world are adding to it, contributing to it, and everyone here can, benefit and use from it without necessarily paying anything. Not necessarily paying, a university site-wide license of $3 million or, or having to pay for your own Matlab student license. And so this kind of ecosystem is gaining a lot of popularity, especially with things, like startup companies that need to be quick and agile and can't afford to pay, huge site licenses to companies like MathWorks. And so a lot of work and effort has been put into making kind of this look and feel a lot like Matlab to try to attract a lot of attention to normal Matlab users. And so learning this as a tool set will not only make you more agile in the workforce, but on top of that, and what I think is also probably most importantly, as information theory blossoms and develops, outside of just traditional communications applications and into fields like biology and neuroscience and physics, is the explanatory power of this tool set. Okay, and so that's based on something called IPython. Again, it has its own separate name, and that stands for Interactive Python. And that's essentially a way of saying that we can interact with Python code interactively through the browser. And that's what we're looking at right here. Right here, you see what I'm actually, looking at right here is my web browser, and I'm running something called a notebook. This notebook is kind of a living, breathing document in which you embed Python code, you embed images, you embed, a rendered text where you can do bold, underline, things like that in different sizes. So for example, if I wanted to come in and edit this, I can just edit it, and it's now a live, breathing document. And so the same thing I can do with words, I can do with code, and we'll see examples of that throughout the rest of the document. So just as a matter of example, I'm going to be presenting this tutorial through an IPython document, so we can get a feel for how these things look and work. And just again to emphasize for some people that came in, this notebook is available for you to download and follow along with at this URL. So if you'd like to pull out your laptop, navigate to this URL, download the notebook, you can also run along with us tonight and ask any kind of questions if you have any questions. Again, this is very informal, feel free to ask me any questions. Okay. So we can start here. Okay. So the IPython notebook is composed of cells. Okay? And cells are essentially just these little highlighted brackets here. You see this piece of highlighting here? This is a cell. And so each notebook is divided into a series of cells, each of which kind of accomplish different things. They're either meant to be pure Python code, or they're meant to be rendered text or images. And so this is what allows you the flexibility to compose one notebook out of many different parts, both interactive, documents, videos from the internet, in addition to, live actual running Python code. Are there any questions so far?
I have a question. So I'm an information theorist. One of the key things I like to do is to write things in LaTeX. Can I incorporate LaTeX into an IPython document?
Yes. Thank you for pointing that out. So LaTeX renders live in the notebook. So for example, I'll just type something right here, and you see the equation is rendered like you would in a normal LaTeX document. So you can type almost full LaTeX. There are some limits. LaTeX does some pretty fancy stuff. But in general, you can typeset equations, as we're all familiar with, and they get rendered. So, normal people can actually look at them as well. Excellent question. Any other questions? Can everybody that wants to follow along? Okay. So one point that I maybe forgot to go over is how Anaconda fits into the IPython ecosystem. The scientific Python ecosystem is the big fancy name for all of these kind of packages that we see here. We have SymPy, SciPy, Matplotlib, NumPy. There's a whole suite of like 100, 150 different packages, all of which comprise together make up the scientific Python ecosystem. You can download these packages yourself individually and manage, versions and things like that separately, or you can use a kind of packaged environment like Anaconda. One great point brought up earlier is another example is WinPy. Another example is Python XY. This kind of simplifies the process of managing your Python ecosystem. One other point of difference between Matlab is, say, Matlab does all that for you. Matlab handles its installed toolboxes, and you don't have to worry about names of things or versions. In Python, because things has kind of been added on and it's kind of been organically growing with the community, it still has a little bit of these kind of rough edges. So one way to get around that is to use a package manager like Anaconda, for example. And so I gave that URL earlier to go and download that package so you guys can install it on your own machines. We also have a flash drive floating around if anybody needs a flash drive to install that. Okay, so as I was mentioning, IPython is just an interactive way to work with Python code in conjunction with local images or web resources or text or LaTeX. And it's a way to kind of really explain things to people, explain your results to people. So another point of confusion I'd like to avoid is what I'm showing you guys tonight is not the replacement for Matlab. The scientific Python ecosystem has its own tools that are essentially Matlab clones. So the window looks exactly like Matlab. And so that's going to be much more familiar for us to drop in and start developing our code, our simulations, and things like that. The document that I'm showing you guys here tonight, again, it's called an IPython Notebook, and its real power is it's an explanatory tool. We use it to explain our results. There's a growing, there's a growing movement in having these in conjunction to publications. One example that I can show you guys at the end, I've linked at the end of this notebook, is recently the journal Nature has a couple big, publications that have supplementary materials are these IPython notebooks, which come with the data and let you reproduce all of the figures in their paper, let you kind of interactively explore some of the, supplementary figures that aren't just static, they're kind of living, breathing in this document. In addition, they're even going so far as to host examples of these notebooks so that you can, on their website, just directly run this notebook. And so again, that one of those examples is linked directly on the bottom. In other words, you don't have to install anything. You just go directly to their website, you click on their demo, and you're using a cloud environment to run this notebook.
What would Nature do? They would print the article, and they would then give you a URL, say, for further information.
Right.
Detailed explanation of results. Go here.
Right. So the supplementary material would be a hosted version of the notebook.
And that's becoming an expectation.
They're increasingly interested in part because they did a recent meta study where they found, I think, 25 of the most highly cited papers in Nature and Science, and only about 3 or 4 of them were actually reproducible.
Oh, wow.
And so what they're learning is that there's an increasing interest in actually having other people get the data
Right.
to tinker and things like these notebooks. These are useful.
And so we had a question back here?
Yeah, I was wondering, can I take this and then create a PDF out of that?
Yes. You can turn this say it again? Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. So his question was, can I just turn this document into a PDF? Yes. There are multiple static versions of this document. You can turn it into a PDF. You can save it as just a normal, boring HTML file to share with people as a website or as a PDF, things like that. There's even, more experimental tool sets that help generate automatically the LaTeX to reproduce everything and help keep the formatting. But that kind of works a little so-so. Any other questions? Okay, so again, this is meant to be interactive and you guys are meant to follow along. So in this notebook, I have some, kind of spots for us to kind of pause and you guys can run on your own and we can discuss if you have any problems or things like that. So is everybody with their laptops prepared to follow along with the notebook and run it on their own? Okay. So to go back to what I was saying, the notebook is composed of cells. And each cell is essentially either rendered text or code. Okay? And rendered text looks exactly like this. Bold text, bullet points, images. Now, for example, if I double click this cell, we see the raw content that I put into this cell. This is called Markdown. It's a very standard way to write kind of structured text very simply and that the browser knows how to render. So I edit this kind of cell, I do whatever I want, and I can go ahead and run the cell, and then it gets rendered in the browser. So we have text-based cells which get rendered, which include images, GIFs, YouTube videos, things like that. And then we also have code cells. See, this here is actually highlighted real live Python code. And so this cell, for example, just goes ahead and imports all of the necessary libraries to run the rest of the notebook. So you activate a cell by literally clicking play. See this play button right up here? That goes ahead and actually runs the cell.
How do I get to this? So I've installed the continuum thing.
Okay,
I have cloned your repo,
okay,
but what do I do?
okay. Excellent question. So Anaconda comes with a graphical installer and a graphical kind of launching tool and a command line launching tool. If you guys are familiar with the command line, I would recommend the command line. If you're not, go ahead and use the visual launching tool. That visual launching tool kind of looks like a snake, right? It's like a green guy that shows up. It's called the Anaconda. You search your computer for Anaconda, you'll see it. That lets you launch the IPython Notebook. Okay? So when you launch, we'll go through it like this. Whether you use the command line or the actual visual tool set, when you first run IPython, so the command to run IPython from the terminal is just this command right here, IPython space notebook. Once you've installed the Anaconda toolset, you just type it into a terminal, or you can go ahead and use the visual installer. Once you do that, a new browser window pops up. And this is the first thing you see when you launch IPython. It's just a file navigator. So from here, you go ahead and navigate to wherever it is you downloaded that notebook. So this is where I have this notebook. I go ahead, I click on this notebook file right here, and the notebook loads. Thank you for that question. Any other questions? IPython Notebook? Did you install Anaconda? Okay. Try the graphical installer, the graphical tool.
If you do Windows Q, search for Anaconda, and then there's a specific Anaconda terminal you have to use, not the regular Windows terminal.
Yeah, sorry, that's a Windows thing. Any other questions? Okay. So just to finish up on cells, each cell is either rendered text or live Python code, all of which get run, okay, with this little play button. That's how you actually activate the cell and cause it to actually render in the browser or run the code, okay? So you go ahead and you run this notebook, and we come here to the first part of, the first part for us to be able to follow along here. So things in Python look a lot like Matlab, but they're not exactly Matlab. There are great resources that I've linked at the bottom of the notebook that are links to, if you're a Matlab expert, somebody just compiled the list of the top most annoying things in Python for people that come from Matlab. One example of which is indexing starts at 0. That's one that always gets people tripped up. When you start counting things in Matlab, you start by 1. In Python, when you start counting, you start things at 0. There's also a different way to square numbers. You use a star instead of the caret. Those are just kind of the little annoying things that are kind of the activation costs of switching to another language. But that's present in every language. So feel free to go ahead and take the next 2 minutes really fast to kind of run through these kind of do-it-yourself examples as I continue on. And you guys can feel free to ask me any questions. Probably the most important part that we're going to be interested in is the library called Matplotlib. And it's called Matplotlib because it's meant to mirror Matlab's plotting library. Okay? So, it exposes commands like, plot, and the order of the arguments tend to be the same, and it kind of tries to ease the activation energy of coming in. So for example, we see here this image that gets rendered with a legend and two waves and et cetera, et cetera. I can just go ahead and change this noise parameter, rerun the cell, and I see that my noisy wave is now much more noisy. Okay? So this kind of simple, trivial example might seem just exactly like that, a triviality. But I work a lot with clinical collaborators, and I can tell you from personal experience that this kind of power is very critical when it comes to trying to parse through the complicated language of the stuff that we're doing with other people. So, in other words, if a doctor asks me a question and says, oh, well, what if we just make this a little wigglier? I say, I don't know, let's see, for example. And I go ahead, I change, whatever I have to change, I run it, and the image changes right there live. So it's a very powerful exploratory tool to kind of understand what's happening. One other example of where we're using this kind of interactive way to explore what exactly is going on is in some of the probability and statistics classes we're teaching here at UCSD in the bioengineering department. In these classes, we're providing the students with these kind of notebooks that are interactive and allowing the students to kind of edit and change them in real time during class. So for example, I can link that at the bottom so you guys can see some of the material we have for the classes as well. But for example, while you're introducing, say, the Gaussian distribution, you can have, the LaTeX up equation, you can have some words explaining what the parameters are, where they come from, and then you can actually have a live block of code that the students can run. And instead of a student wondering, man, I really can't get a hang of what this sigma does. I wonder what this kind of variance does. They can conceptually really get a handle on that right there in class by changing that parameter and seeing it widen or lessen or things like that. And so that becomes actually a very powerful tool in class when kids raise their hand and say, oh, look at this. It gets wider, but it gets lower, it gets, higher, things like that. So again, this is very powerful to explain and explore concepts with people. This will not be your direct replacement for Matlab. The Python ecosystem has those tool sets. So just to reiterate, there are two main things going on with this tool set. One is as a replacement for Matlab in your research, which is very possible, and also encouraged because it makes you more agile as these are free and open source tools, as opposed to the very expensive cost of using the Matlab ecosystem. That's one thing. And another thing is just using these tools to try to really explain concepts to people. That's something where this tool set has really, really excelled. And Matlab, in my opinion, is still lacking behind. Matlab, under pressure from these kind of things, are now working in this area. So those are two things that we have to keep separate in our minds. One is to kind of just replace your own research where you might want to replace Matlab. And another thing is to really explain concepts to people and explore concepts with people. That's what I think is probably the most important. Was there a hand back there? Any questions? Okay. Okay. So we're kind of moving along a little slower here, but that's okay. So we're going to just kind of go through some of the main libraries that are really, really fundamental to the scientific Python ecosystem so that when we hear these names and you see them floating around, we're not intimidated. Remember, everything in Python has its own name. That's just the cost of working in the scientific Python ecosystem. One example is the Pandas data management library. Okay, so that's the name of this library. It's all Python code. It's all built on top of Python. And this library is essentially a way to help us deal with data. So if you're familiar with databases or even just something as simple as Excel, you can read a CSV file either from your local machine or from somewhere on the internet. You can read an Excel file raw. The Pandas library exposes all those methods for us. They try to make it very easy for us. We can go ahead, read these files, and you see what's rendered here right in the notebook looks almost exactly like an Excel spreadsheet. Right? We have the column names, we have the rows, we have all of our data, things like that. So it's almost like a mini Excel living right in your notebook. And this actually opens up a lot of possibilities, allowing you to explore, different aspects of your data, and it's really useful for exploratory data analysis. So the Pandas library really helps kind of give you that data management power that you would say do something in Excel. I know a lot of people that first have workflows like they do something in Excel, they get it in the right shape, they do something, then they export that to comma separated value file, then they import that into Matlab, then they generate a figure, things like that. This is all stuff that we can do inside the Python ecosystem using all of the available libraries. So this notebook, again, is provided for you guys. We're not going to go through it, right? Not everything right now, but you guys can feel free to I provided many examples of how to do things, differently in all these libraries that you guys can go through and explore. One of the most important ones. So again, I'm just running all of these cells. Okay. One of the most important parts of, say, using something like the Pandas library is that it integrates, it's built in with a lot of the other plotting libraries, okay? So that you can just read in something in, using your Pandas library, create what's the native data structure to Pandas is called a data frame, read that in, and then you don't have to worry about doing something with it or manipulating to get it into a certain shape to plot it, or a lot of those headaches are kind of abstracted out and are handled by libraries behind the scene. One example is Matplotlib. Another example, just to kind of add more confusion for you guys, is called Seaborn, which is a more kind of advanced version of Matplotlib built on top of Matplotlib. So again, don't be intimidated. They're all named different things, but really you kind of just learn to ignore that they're named all different things. And a lot of this kind of exploratory plotting and things like that is built into these libraries. So one example here is I can just say, I read in a CSV file. This is an iris dataset, very famous in machine learning, detailing the various aspects of different flowers. I read it in, and I can just ask it to describe the data set to me with using one method right here, describe. And so Excel has this, we all know, Excel has this, Matlab has this across several different methods. But Python here very nicely exposes us to one just little method here, which gives us, a bunch of descriptive statistics on the different aspects of our data frame. On top of that, we can just go ahead and issue a direct plot command giving us a scatter plot of different columns that we can select. We can create box plots using one line, and it uses sensible defaults for colors and labels and things like that. Notice, again, this was issued with one line. So a lot of this is tried to be, kind of capture the ease of use and kind of really exploratory. You don't want to have to do all these kind of things just to look at one quick plot that you might end up not using. So all these kind of libraries really help extract that away to help leave the really kind of just data exploring directly to you. Okay, so here I've provided some exercises for you guys to go through. And again, if anybody's following along with the exercises and has a question, feel free to ask. One example I always show, one of my favorite plots that's automatically included, is here Seaborn calls a pair plot. And we've all seen this, before. This is kind of a composition of three different images, a correlation matrix across features, scatter plots of all those different features, and then histograms of the feature counts and things like that. And Seaborn provides access to this one kind of really very powerful exploratory image by just one method, for example.
Diego, people in information theory community might not be totally familiar with that. Maybe you can spend a moment on that?
About what the image is?
What all these different images are.
Okay, so this image kind of captures the first phase when you're exploring a data set, the feature exploration phase, and you're trying to see how different features relate to each other. So in this iris data set, there are 3 different kinds of flowers, and then for each flower you collect 4 different features. And so this plot captures how those features relate to each other across all the different groups. So for example, here we have sepal width. In this row and in this column, we have sepal length. So those 2 features relate to each other across all 3 different groups like this. So with this one image, with this one kind of method, for example, you can very easily, almost immediately get an intuition for your data set and say, wow, okay, I think sepal length and petal length provide some nice separation between the classes. Whereas something like sepal width and sepal length right up here doesn't necessarily provide nice separation. So this really helps just get an intuition almost immediately. You don't have to spend time writing 150 lines just to kind of explore, oh, does this make sense or not? This kind of really just helps, get it out of the way and gives you a very nice visual representation with some really nice defaults to kind of help build your intuition immediately. Does that make sense? Todd? Any other questions? So one of the most powerful aspects of the scientific Python ecosystem is all of the work, love, and care that's been poured into the development of the machine learning the machine learning crowd has really taken the development of these tool sets and really charged through and really added a lot of functionality and a lot of just beautiful images. And so this is one great way I use to kind of instantiate and kind of introduce these concepts. In other words, I've had a lot of success thinking to myself, if I can explain to someone, some concept of, some concept of machine learning, like some kind of classifier or something like that, then it kind of gives you a way in to say, well, I can build on top of this and start to explore things like more traditional, information theoretic concepts like the geometry of KL divergences and things like that. One really cool example that I was going to try to have ready for you guys, but it wasn't ready yet, but I'll post on the GitHub so you guys can feel free to check back on that. I found a really excellent notebook kind of exploring topics in information geometry, if some of the information theorists in the crowd are familiar with that. So that kind of really helps kind of visually explore these concepts and explain them in a way that's very approachable. So machine learning is just an instance of that. So in other words, you don't have to be a machine learning expert. Just kind of extract from this, by example, how you would show somebody to something using, these kind of tool sets. And in other words, a lot of the pieces of machine learning libraries you'd use, in traditional, information theory work like simulating entropies and things like that, because they're all built in around this machine learning kind of high-level paradigm. Okay, so here I provide a lot of information and, exploratory images kind of introducing these concepts. So here, for example, we see an example of trying to build a line that separates these two different classes across a certain feature space. And this is one example of a support vector machine and how that's kind of conceptually captured in the machine learning library. One, again, as I was mentioning, one thing that's really built in into this kind of scientific Python ecosystem in the machine learning tool set is really meant for ease of use. Oh, excuse me. And so by way of example, the scientific Python machine learning tool set provides this kind of easy to use map. If you don't know, what classifier you need from your problem set, you kind of just follow this flow chart. Well, I want to have labeled data. I know the number of categories, but I have less than 10,000 samples. It recommends this certain class. Go ahead.
Sorry, so I'm going to have really basic questions for you. But suppose I wanted to put this picture like you have it here, but I don't want to see that code above it. Can I hide that code above it?
This cell right up here?
Yeah, that's
Okay, that's a feature that's coming in IPython, is hiding code cells and just showing their outputs. Right now, that's not possible. Any other question?
Can you hide at least the in-out, or you can't do anything about that?
No, this part here, you can't hide that either yet. Yeah. But when you save this as PDF, there are ways to kind of remove all of that, ancillary text. Feel free to ask me any questions, guys.
So for the test editing part, is the scripting language in use in Docker language? I mean, where can we find documentation for that scripting language used in the test editing?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that again? Where can you find documentation for the scripting language used?
In the test part, like you have coding, you have test, and there's some formatting.
Text, T-E-X-T.
Oh, right, okay. You're saying the text formatting part. Right, okay, yeah, I'm sorry. That is called Markdown. Markdown. Yeah, Markdown. And so Markdown is a standard thing. It's a very standard thing in kind of browser-based text editing. So you just type in Markdown, there's very simple syntax. I'll just do a quick example for you right here. So I create a new cell. This shows you just a quick workflow. I create a new cell. I change it from code to Markdown. I can come in here and say, this is bold.
So the double star is bold.
Double star is bold. 1 star is italics. Well, this is italicized, but you see, 1 star. You use these guys to kind of create large headings of different sizes, smaller headings, things like that.
What about LaTeX?
So there's one example of just typing LaTeX right in, and this LaTeX gets rendered. I don't know why it keeps lowering that. That's a bug on my browser, but it gets rendered directly in the browser like that. So all of these examples are in the notebook. So again, one great thing is if you get this notebook and you say, man, how the heck did he put that in there? You just double click it. And that exposes the raw text that's in the cell. And then you can feel free to edit it, change it, and then play it again and see what pops out. Another great thing about something like this is, say, you can have this kind of table of contents right here. So in this very extensive document I prepared here for you guys, there's a table of contents. You can jump, from different sections to different sections, and that's a nice tool to kind of quickly navigate very large, complex documents. Okay, so kind of going back to just this machine learning example. The machine learning libraries in the scientific Python environment are built, again, for ease of use. And that means that all of the different kind of classifiers have very consistent APIs, in that sense, for application programming interface or something. Essentially, once you choose a classifier, you don't necessarily have to read its very specific documentation. It has methods like test, it has methods like train, it has methods like predict, all of them. And this standard is something that's adopted across all of the libraries. So again, I'm talking about machine learning, but all standard libraries are built around this kind of standard, methods, so that you don't have to necessarily memorize all the documentation, which is one problem that a lot of people, when they're first learning Matlab, face. Oh, this method is called this, but if I want to do this, it's called this, and there's maybe an underscore, maybe there's not. So these are kind of, things that people have taken into account as they're developing these libraries. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'll kind of move along to the end here and show you guys some of the more cool examples that we can do interactively. Okay, well, this is just one example showing decision boundaries, again, which is just one line, very easy. My favorite example is here at the bottom. So again, guys, this document is here for you guys. Download it, review it on your own time. Feel free to double-click cells, see how these things are generated, and kind of this document. This is usually given in a 2 to 3 hour tutorial, so I'm kind of very, kind of compressing the tutorial here. But you guys have access to this document. Just run everything. Okay, here we are. Okay, so this is a very kind of powerful example. So again, this is looking at how a support vector machine changes, it's separating hyperplane as we increase the number of points and what support vectors are chosen. Those details aren't important. Just kind of take this as an example. Here in this example, we see something. We see, certain points are selected as the support vectors, and we have our kind of maximum margin separating hyperplane here. But critically up here, we see a slider. And so when we move the slider, we see how the image changes, and the image now starts to adapt to what it is that we're doing. Okay? So this is kind of an even more powerful way to interactively explore things with people. I cannot overestimate, I cannot, emphasize enough how important something like this is to explain things to people. When students are coming in here and playing around, when you're first learning this, instead of seeing equations, you see a dial, and you're wondering, oh, wow, that's how these points are chosen. I can see why this angle would change, and how the classifier's behavior changes as the structure of these points changes. This kind of mentality of interactively exploring something right in your browser. You don't have to ask people to, load up things or things that are foreign to them. This is right in your browser, and you can provide these kind of things to have them explore how these things change in a very interactive way. And so this is something that I found to be very, very powerful when it comes to explaining things to people. And so I provide some more examples here. This question? Yeah, go ahead.
So one of the things I do in Matlab that I like is for loops with pauses in them, so I can kind of create movies.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Can we do that here? Can we do a for loop that creates a movie?
Yes. Yeah. A cell itself, you couldn't pause the execution of, but in that for loop, you can have it render an animation just like that. So in other words, you wouldn't have the slider bar. It would just render the whole image and then maybe loop.
Without that, when it moves along, so you can kind of see it.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. All of that functionality is there as well. So, okay.
Maybe you can go back to that previous example so people can see how easy it was to write that code to do that, where you have the slider bar.
This guy right here?
Yeah, let them just see up there.
Okay.
So the key point is the interact line.
So this interact line right here is what gives you this bar, and then every time this bar changes, it runs this method right here. And so just also kind of just to really quickly expose just how easy the machine learning kind of system is in scientific Python. This generates fake data. We create a new classifier. We fit. This is all plotting right here. And then we just ask it, to plot some decision function of this classifier, and that's it. So this very simple logical method, once you understand the basics of the API, gives you something as powerful as this right here. And we can see how this angle changes and things like that. Are there any other questions?
Where was this SVC, the name SVC defined?
This right here?
Yeah.
This was up at the beginning of...
Mine couldn't find, so it says the name was not defined.
Oh, excellent point. An IPython notebook has a very linear structure to it. Okay, so if this cell down here uses something in the cell above and you only run the cell down here, then you're going to get things like that because that cell above didn't actually, populate the namespace. So thank you for bringing that up. It's a great point. In other words, you need to run the cells in order if that's how you've structured the notebook. So this top cell imports that support vector machine classifier. Then the cell below actually uses it. So you have to run the first cell and then the second cell and like that.
Is there an automatic way to populate the workspace?
Yeah, so you just say right here in the cell menu, run all. And so that automatically just runs everything and everything is popular and things like that. So one thing I always get from people who come from Matlab environments, man, that's annoying. I don't want, okay, again, what I'm showing you right here, the IPython environment, is not the Matlab clone. I'm sorry to belabor the point, but I just want to make that very clear. This is not how you're going to develop your simulations or your code. This is how you're going to explain it or explore things like that. When it comes down to the really nitty-gritty of actually just getting in there and developing your code, and you want a debugger just like Matlab has, and you want all the kind of functionality, you use other tools that are automatically installed when you install something like Anaconda. So one example is like Spider. That's what it's called in that environment, which is one Matlab clone of many. So thank you for that question. Okay, so I want to, are there, yeah, go ahead.
Just one question. Do we have certain kind of manual for us to use this? Something like the help function in the Matlab?
Excellent question, yes.
Repeat his question.
Is there any kind of help manual or help function that we can use to use this? Yes, excellent question. So one thing I skipped up here at the very top, let me get up to the top here. Here. You have this tab. When you press tab, it gives you a drop-down list of all the available functions that are available, right? You can select one, add a question mark, run the cell, and out pops all of the documentation available for that specific function. So this is all also built in here to the IPython. Sure. So when we have some object up here, like say like this right here, for example, is a pandas data frame. You press period, you press the tab, and this gives you a drop-down list of all of the different methods that are available for this object, right? You can select one and say, man, I don't remember how that goes. I don't remember how the order of arguments goes. You type a question mark, and you run that cell, and out pops this help menu. And this is the exact help menu that you can find on Python's, on SciPy's website. And so this is a quick way to kind of say, oh, okay, I remember, this argument goes second while this argument goes fourth, things like that. So this is a kind of a drop-in kind of help menu, which is all also freely available on the internet, and much more kind of, ingrained when you use a Matlab, a more full kind of Matlab clone. Excellent question. Thank you. Any other questions? Go ahead.
This is probably an installation question, but so I installed the Anaconda suite and I did run all, but it's saying I have no module named Seaborn.
Okay. Another excellent question. Out of all of the packages included in Seaborn, not all of them are included because they just want to make things even more complicated for us. So there are various ways to install packages. All of the packages are freely available. You can install them using their, individual package manager, the Conda package manager, or you can install them in the command line using one quick command. I'll show you an example.
Does your clone directory have a README file that explains this stuff? Or?
Package installation, no. I'll add that documentation in there. One example is to say something like pip install Seaborn. And pip is a package manager in Python. And so, pip just told me, well, you already have Seaborn, but if you didn't have Seaborn, then this would go ahead and actually install the Seaborn package for you. And then you can go ahead and run that cell.
Now, for the future, Diego, I heard a rumor that Google is going to support some of this stuff in a manner that is...
Yes, okay. Thank you. Excellent point. So, notice, right now, when you download and install Matlab, you download one file and installs Matlab and everything's done for you and you have it on your local machine, right? Well, notice, we've gone through the effort of installing all these packages and we're using a web browser. So the next logical step is to say, well, why can't I just keep everything on the web browser? So companies like Google, for example, are working on extensions that build this into Chrome. So in other words, you only have to go download one extension for Chrome, just like you install, AdBlock Plus or something, and you get all of this for free built into the browser automatically. So you don't have to worry about this package or that package or blah, blah, blah. You don't have to kind of maintain any of that. It's all kind of just built into the web browser. That's one major push that companies like Google are making bets on.
Do we know when that's going to happen?
Within the next year.
They're using this platform.
They announced formally that they are making IPython native for Chrome.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, they have. Another very promising thing that we're working on getting right here at UCSD and the UC system is really pushing for is a centralized kind of notebook running thing. So at the very bottom, I provide some links to say the nature demo. It's going to be like that except for your entire university. I wanted to remind me to show you guys some really awesome plots.
We'll do the plot first.
Okay. All right, so just to kind of emphasize something here, because this is working in your browser, you get to use all the stuff that your browser already knows how to use, like JavaScript, for example. JavaScript's a pretty powerful thing. It has some really powerful kind of plotting libraries and things like that. One excellent example, other tool set that's included in the scientific Python ecosystem is Plotly. Okay, so let's not worry about what it is, but it's just a plotting library. Okay, so we're going to skip all this stuff here. And we see one example of a plot here. So just to see kind of how this works here, you can, you have a contour plot, and as you move the mouse over, you have the projections over all the surfaces. You can rotate this guy, rotate it to different views, kind of zoom in here. All, things that we're used to looking at when we plot things in Matlab, because it pops out a separate plot tool. But this is running in your browser, okay? And so this is one great way to kind of interactively explain things as well. Just like before we saw version 1.0 with a slider, here's kind of version 2.0. Okay, so with a little bit more investment in time, you can get these kind of plots that look something like this. Another example, say, is down here. This is a kind of a complicated example. It grows these kind of fractal kind of spanning trees. My computer can run it here.
Well, if you're having trouble with that, Diego,
No. Here we go. Boom, boom, boom. Look at that. Wow. Wow. Oh my God. Oh my God. Look at that. So you see this kind of fractal tree pattern kind of growing around your browser. Okay, so that's just one example. Here's another really cool example of how, waves, complicated wave behaviors, you change the frequency of the waves. Okay, well, maybe I am having trouble with my browser. That's okay. Let's look at the Nature article.
And maybe what you can emphasize here, Diego, is that none of the computation here is running on your computer.
Right, so in this example, I don't have to have IPython installed. This is an example where all of this is running directly on somebody else's machine, namely a company Rackspace by way of Nature. Okay, so this is where computation is running somewhere else. So you don't have to worry about, oh, my computer's not necessarily strong enough or fast enough, or I don't have the right memory, or I don't have all the right packages. And this is where this kind of environment is moving to. Imagine you don't have to install Matlab on your own machine. You kind of just have it in the cloud. That's kind of what this is trying to capture. And so one really cool set, obviously they really did an excellent job here, is kind of classifying clusters in real time as we change these parameters. So we can change these parameters and see how, our false positive rates and our classifier kind of changes. And so this image is being fetched from the Hubble Deep Telescope live onto our machine. Okay, so we're going through, grabbing a frame. Then we're coming through and saying, oh, I want to do this classifier, and I want to vary these kind of parameters. And then we're watching how it says, well, I think this is a galaxy, or I think this is a cluster, I think this is maybe not live. Because now I just thought, no, I don't think we have access to the live Hubble telescope. Let's just say fresh, relatively new. The universe hasn't changed that much since this image was gathered. Okay, so this is just one example. And Nature also has here a list of notebooks that come along with academic publications.
Maybe you can double back to what you're saying about the UC system. The UC
Let's see if it's up.
is going to set it up so that whenever you teach a class, a student basically just has what that Nature demo is. They don't have to install anything.
Yeah, it's down right now, UCSD. That's correct. So for example, right now, obviously, on demo day, it has to break, but UCSD has its kind of local system hosted at this URL. And so if this was working, it would look just like my IPython notebook when I ran it. Students would come in, select, hey, here's my class notebook, select it, they'd run it, they'd do their homework part, and that would be there. So they don't have to maintain any of the computation themselves. So you could be on a very tiny kind of $200 laptop, but be running computations that are running on a cluster on Amazon Web Services across 100 different machines. And this is something that you as a person do not have to worry about. So this is kind of a trend to how these tools are developing in the future.
So tell your university they should be doing it.
Any other questions?
So back on the property plot,
Mm-hmm.
is there a way you can label specific points?
Say that again?
So if you're doing like an optimization problem, you want to label a specific point?
Oh, like you want to label, yes, that's an excellent point. I've seen, one of my favorite images that I couldn't find for this demo was actually some complicated surface like this. And you see, again, it's a shame that I have to describe it to you, but 3 different points corresponding to 3 different optimization algorithms. One's red, one's blue, one's green. They all start at the same place, and then you see them follow different trajectories, fall at different rates, all the way until they find, the actual minimizer, for example. And so this is all stuff that you can have right in the browser. And someone can say, oh, I wonder if I'm, if you're using kind of stochastic gradient descent, what happens if I change the step size to be this? And you say, well, let's see. You plop it in there and you see, oh, look, now it converges faster, for example. And so this is something that you can use in the notebook.
Now speaking of optimization, Diego, can this stuff interact with optimization algorithms like the stuff Stephen Boyd talked about?
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. I'm sure in Stephen Boyd's talk, he talked about CVX Pie. Does that sound familiar? CVX Pie, first was CVX, which was an excellent Matlab optimization toolkit that they developed in his lab. And that tool set was responsible for having you specify an optimization problem in English, solving it for you. Excellent tool. It was in Matlab. They went the next step and ported it over to Python. So CVX Pie is just like another library. You say, hey, pip, install CVX Pie, and you get all of the power of his CVX tool set. And also in his talk, he talked about the DCP rule set, right, for something, convex programming. I forgot what the D stands for. In other words, yes, there are very excellent standard optimization libraries built into Python and this tool set by experts such as Stephen Boyd, which are taking bets on this. So I'm not just some crazy guy on a soapbox saying, hey, use this. Like, industry experts are putting a lot of weight into these tool sets because they're free and open source. It doesn't cost anybody anything.
It's fundamentally that way really charges all this. I mean, people are just thinking this is so important that companies, other people are just coming together or came together to provide this, to write it. I mean, what really drove it?
So originally Python was just a full boring old programming language that wasn't doing anything with its life. And then someone came over and created all these excellent, free and open source sites because it's always the nature of things. That's why sometimes you find hardcore physicists are doing things in Linux because it's free and like they're just doing something because their machine needs something like that. And so this developed a huge momentum, and then companies started adding their little pieces. Bam, bam, bam. And now you have a huge ecosystem of just these free and open source tools. And it's kind of like a self-fulfilling feedback prophecy system here where because it's free and open source, everybody uses it and it keeps contributing and on and on and on and on.
Like these package managers, like you say, Anaconda. Who powers that?
So there's a company, Anaconda, that develops that free and open source. Because realistically, if you were so inclined, you could do that yourself. It would just be a little bit more of a pain. But they've also commercialized their own kind of unique libraries for companies that need to do A, B, and C much faster.
Everybody's selling something.
Right. So they've developed an open source and commercialized.
Because they want to sell more Chrome notebooks.
Well, one of the things that happened is that many startup companies, so if you take a look at, big data is everywhere.
Sure.
And people don't want to be using Matlab because of the license fees.
Right.
And so people start to build infrastructure and contribute to build very sophisticated tool sets. And a lot of these algorithms build on top of optimization algorithms and whatnot, and they want things to scale. And little by little, people started to adopt this type of stuff. And so Google wants to be a supporter and provider for those types of tools.
I think it's great.
So we ran a little bit over. We're going to move to the panel discussion now. In the meantime, this is my email address. Please feel free to send me any kind of questions. Don't feel bad if it's a stupid question or a simple question. I'm just a normal graduate student. I'm not a fancy guy like Stephen Boyd, so feel free to ask me questions.
We will have this information available on our Science Information Center website. That's www.soihub.org.
SOI Hub, org.
Yep. And there'll be there's an education component on that. We'll start linking to this and actually working with these guys to do some educational modules and that kind of thing. So look for more to come.
Okay, so contact me, ask me questions. If you're interested and say, hey, I'm doing A, how do you think this can apply to me? Just feel free to send me an email and let's see if we can,
There it is.
get something.
There it is.
There it is. Okay, well, thank you guys.